Hello, my name is Tim Knox. I am the Senior Consulting Engineer for Industry Solutions at Jamf. With me today, I have Sean Rabbit, who is the Senior Consulting Engineer for Identity at Jamf. I'm very excited to have Greg Menard here, the co-founder and CTO of PlayerLink, to talk about how we will be using single login. So today we'll be talking about Jamf setup and reset and our new feature of it called single login. I'll be starting by talking about the classic setup and reset and what we used to do and where we've come from. Sean is going to come in a little bit later and talk about how it actually works with Azure. And at the end, we'll hear from Greg to talk about how we've all put it in place together. So a few years ago, we built a few apps called Setup and Reset. The idea behind these two apps is that we were to give the users the ability to change the way an iPhone or an iPad can be used on the fly without needing to contact IT. It came from a direct ask from our customers. Everyone was trying to figure out a way to use shared devices between users, and what we came up with was to break it down by role. We felt that there were a few ways, if there were a few ways a device was going to be used between users on a sales floor, a shop floor, or in a hospital, we could move the provisioning process down the line a little bit to the person who would actually be using it. They could pick up a device that was in a waiting state. They could open setup and select a role that was most applicable to them. They would then use it, and setup would release the apps that they'd need to be used. They would release the configuration profiles, and it would look the way they would need it to look for their role. After the ship was over, they could re-hide the apps, but if they really wanted a way, such as in healthcare, to make sure that all of the data on the device was removed, they would use reset to wipe the device completely. It's a big red button that would totally destroy any data on the device and start the provisioning process over again completely. Well, that worked if you were looking at a much larger view, but individual people who were using those devices, not just a generic role. And that meant that you still had to log into every single app after you selected your role. Need your email? Log into the email. Need PlayerLink for all of your important documents and videos? You'd have to log into PlayerLink. Your scheduling software, everything else, everything you needed on that device, you'd have to log into each and every one of those. And that was after you selected your role. And we didn't have a way to prove that you were actually supposed to be in that role. There was never a password between you and your role selection. I remember being a part of the very first JNUC session about this software, and it was literally the first question we got from the audience. How do we restrict users that we know should be in the role to only that role? And then there's reset, the big red button. It's a really big hammer for what should be a simple end of shift action. The time it takes to get back online, select a language and the region is really hard for some use cases and very prohibitively long between users in some environments. So we improved it. We took all the feedback from all those people and that we've talked with over the last couple of years, and we've released an added chunk of setup that we're calling single login. Now you can open the setup app. There's an optional flag that you can put in place to create an individual passcode. You can even use biometrics. Access to setup will be disallowed until you have that passcode in place. It's all optional, but you could put it so that before any user can do anything on that device, setup is there waiting for a device passcode. You would then sign in to your Azure ID, which is what we're using today. We're hoping that more IDPs will adopt this in the future, but today we have it fully supported with Azure. And then we can assign that role from Azure. So if you know what that role is once you've signed in, that role is pre-selected for you, and you can have all of the same functionality we have with setup just behind a login screen. And we know that you are actually using the role that you're supposed to be using. And then, very importantly, at the end of your shift, you've got reset, which can not only clear that device level passcode and clear that biometric at the end of the shift, but it can remove that role. It can remove the single sign-on extension, and you can now be back into that null state, waiting to use that device for the next user. Yes, it's still using that role idea that we had with the original setup and reset, but that added individuality between to allow that specific person to be logged in. So let's see how it actually works in practice. We're watching a little video here where we'll be going through the entire process. There's an app that needs to be on the device right at the very beginning, Microsoft Authenticator. I stick it on the second page in a default apps folder that nobody sees where I put the phone and the settings app. It's got to be on there, and it's got to be in the shared device mode. But once you have that in place and the config profiles that we'll talk about a little bit later, and the setup with single login, you can now log into single login. You can see here we're signed out of the single sign-on app here we have as an example. So let's look at setup. The user will tap to begin their shift, which will then sign them in with their cloud IDP. In this case, the user has a few selections that they can make once they are actually logged in, but you can have that user assigned properly once you're actually in Azure, and then all those selections get made for you. So you see here we're being redirected to Azure. We're logging in with our known good username and password, totally different experience than what we had with the original setup. Those credentials will get passed along, and now setup should show you a new screen here, where you can select whether you're a nurse or a pharmacist for that day. Generally, those don't often change the same gig, but sometimes you'll have more than one role assigned. You can see here you're signed in as the nurse. It gives you that feedback right on the screen, and now the wallpaper has changed, and you'll have access to the apps that support it. You can see here on our example app, completely logged in, ready to roll. That single sign-on extension has been passed along to the supported app, and now you have that one single experience. At the end, you'll tap that log out button. It will clear the extension attribute we're going to talk in a little bit. It's going to put it back in that null state, ready for that next user to pick it up. All the apps that we don't need at the beginning are gone, and you're back ready to go again. So that's how it looks like from the user side. Let's see what it looks like with Sean to talk about how it works on the Azure side.
Thanks, Tim. So as you can see, there's a bit of magic that takes place when we're talking about doing this setup here. And part of that relies on Microsoft Azure and Active Directory. Now, I'm not going to get deep into the details on how to all up here, because in the Jamf setup guide, you're going to be walked through the steps of creating that redirect URI, grabbing an application ID, grabbing the tenant or directory ID, and creating roles for when someone's going to be logged in. Jamf Setup and Jamf Reset use an OpenID Connect app registration in Microsoft Azure. Inside the app setup, though, you have an app role that you'll create inside the Azure app registration, and that will directly map to the role definition in the app config we'll talk about in a second, and the extension attribute used by Jamf Pro to make the mobile device configuration happen. Now, while you're inside of Microsoft Azure and you're editing this, you'll actually see that Azure has a real pretty name of the role in the identity token, but when they actually send the role over to any app underneath it, Microsoft has limited us to a role that contains no spaces. So if you're creating role names here and you have long names, for example, plan accordingly. It's going to show up on the device with no spaces inside there. We're going to drop that information into an app config, and the app config is what's going to actually teach the Jamf Setup and Jamf Reset application where to go to log in. So in this beginning section of the app config, also shown in the configuration guide, none of this information changes. We're sending some variables like the device ID, the OAuth code for the Jamf Pro server, and that lets Setup and Reset do its magic with Jamf Pro. So in this section of the app config for Jamf Setup, you're going to get some information from your Azure admin who actually created the application for you. First part is going to be the UUID client application that they made in Azure, and that you'll just drop right in place. The second thing is going to be your tenant ID, and the tenant ID will take Jamf Setup directly to your organization's branded login screen for Microsoft Azure. That way, people who are picking up the iPads know exactly what's happening, and they can get right to that screen and see that familiar login. Now, let's talk a little bit about access inside of the Jamf Setup app itself. You have a couple of options here. if you have a user who is Active Directory organization, but is not specifically assigned to a role in the the Microsoft Azure app, you have an option to instead show that user a bunch of predefined roles, so they could pick from basically any role that you would have set up with that particular iOS device. Now, this could be useful. For example, if you have someone who's not normally facing patients day to day, but you need to grab them suddenly to do, say, emergency triage, they could pick up any iOS device like an iPhone or an iPad, log in with their credentials, so that way we know at least somebody in the organization is using it, and be presented a list of roles. Now, if your option is that you want to gate people from using that device completely, though, maybe even if they're a member of the organization, maybe somebody who works at the coffee shop shouldn't necessarily be picking up a iOS device intended for nurses and things like that. You can actually put in a bogus role into the Jamf setup app config to say, hey, you're just not assigned to be able to use this device. And that's no problem, because then if somebody does sign in, the iOS device will stay in its just standard setup, ready for the next person to pick it up and try to log in with an actual valid role. You also, as Tim mentioned earlier there, have the ability to require a passcode be added to the device. And require a passcode is kind of a misnomer. It really does mean either a passcode to get into the device, or it can also mean setting up things like biometrics like Face ID or Touch ID. And again, totally optional. If it's not set up properly, it will actually bounce the user and say, hey, you need to go set up Touch ID, Face ID, passcode unlock first, and then they'll be able to log into the device. Now, there is a ton of stuff that you can do to the Jamf setup application to make it really super pretty, including branding, images, colors, wording to fit your exact needs, change it into different languages. And so here is a link to the configuration guide with all the different tools and toys that you can play with. Jamf Reset is a little bit easier. It actually just has a subset of the values that you would see in Jamf Setup, including, say, that Azure admin information. There's only one extra little bit there, which is the, do I want to do a soft reset or a hard reset? If you set this to a soft reset, the user will simply be logged out of the single sign-on extension, which will let them another person pick it up and be signed in. You'll see how cool that is a little bit later with PlayerLink. Alternatively, you can wipe the device completely. So if you have some old applications that might have, say, patient information inside of them stored there, and you want to wipe the device factory fresh, just set this to a false option instead, and when you hit that reset button, bombs it back to the Stone Age. The last little bit of excitement for app config is the Authenticator app. You do need to tell it that this device will be in shared device mode, because Authenticator can do a lot more than just handle the single sign-on extension. And that's where real magic kicks in for the single sign-on extension for enterprise. So what is the SSOE itself? Well, it's actually acting like a local proxy on the device. So if an application needs to go out and authenticate, instead, the iOS or iPadOS will then take that redirect into a different application and then, okay, this app should handle your authentication instead locally. So in this particular case, this is a payload inside of Jamf Pro for the single sign-on extension. And you'll see the instructions will actually be in the Microsoft guide as well as for the Jamf setup guide here. But basically what we have here is we have some URLs that will be redirected to the bundle ID for Microsoft Authenticator. And at the very bottom, we have a custom configuration area with some information specific for Azure. Microsoft Azure is currently the only identity provider as of this recording that actually handles the single sign-on extension for multiple people in a shared device mode. This shared device mode gets turned on in the section called custom configuration. And if you have some legacy applications, you can actually force that application to use the single sign-on extension. So any application that uses OpenID Connect, OAuth, or SAML can therefore be redirected to use the Microsoft Authenticator app. And any app that uses the Microsoft Authentication library by default will just go to Microsoft Authenticator. You need to talk to your application vendors about using this new single sign-on extension. And chances are they might not have ever heard of it. But by letting them know that your organization really finds value in this technology, it'll help reduce your help desk spending and improve their end users' experience and may continue your using their applications. So it usually lights a nice fire to say, hey, developer, please go out and look at this. One of the things you're going to see in the documentation is actually all the different Microsoft sign-in endpoints. However, some of these might not be applicable to your organization. Microsoft lists literally every sign-in endpoint out there, including some specifically made for different countries, like, for example, a United States government Cloud Fed, Fed Cloud, something like that. And of course, you can see some different extensions here for China as well. Some of these might not be applicable, so you can actually skip them. And then there's one last little bit of excitement. You do have to send an app config over to Microsoft Authenticator, and as part of the SSOE payload, so that is a shared device mode setting to true. You'll have to do that manually by just typing it out into a text editor of your choice. And if you'd like to read more about this information, this lovely, extremely long URL, which we'll keep on the screen for a second here so you can read it later in the recording, hopefully, will explain more about what happens with the Microsoft Identity Platform and how to get other applications to use SSOE. Back to you, Tim.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So that's a lot of the Azure stuff on the back end. It seems like it's a lot. It really isn't all that much when you get down to it. I personally have helped a dozen or so institutions put this in a test environment, all told to get the entire thing stood up once we have set up to put on the device. An hour or so of work in Jamf to get that done once the Azure stuff is handled. And the Azure admins, they do app registration all the time. It's not something to be scared about. Absolutely don't be afraid to talk to your Azure admins about how to get that set up. There are a few small things we need to do in Jamf itself. A lot of this will look really familiar based on what we've had in the past with Jamf setup. But we're going to go through them again right here, so it's all in one single video. We've talked a lot about roles at the beginning. We still need to have those roles, whether or not individuals are gated behind that login or not. So we need to create an extension attribute. This is the same thing we've done before. It's just like in setup 1.0. We may be getting that value from Azure itself if those roles are assigned, or it could be, like we showed in the video, the user making that selection on their own. It's a simple value that you're creating inside the extension attribute area. And remember that you can place that EA anywhere you'd like inside your inventory record. In the past, I have found it to be useful putting it in the extension attribute section. But now that I'm actually tying it to an individual user, I've found it to be much more useful to put it in the user and location section in the inventory display, just to make it a little bit cleaner for you when you're looking for it. And of course, smart groups, our favorite thing to talk about here for our handy-dandy scoping methodology. Here's some examples. Let's say you have a role in Azure that is customer service. Once the user who has that role is logged in, if that is already done in Azure, it'll populate that field as customer service. And as long as that device is in that department is retail SSO bucket, then you should have a nice way to scope that new configuration based on that login to your end user's device. And you can get that second field there for the department, whether it's done through your inventory preload or done in the pre-stage itself, or by hand, or with the MUT. There's lots of ways that we can get that value put in that section there too. And then once the user has tapped reset and that EA's value is cleared, it's still in the department bucket, but that other value, the role is value, is now null. We can fall into a new group and re-restrict those apps and those config profiles. And I know it seems like a small thing, but honestly, over the years, with all of the, I don't know how many people I've helped get set up working with since we released it, a lot. Wallpapers have the biggest impact on not only the end users, but also on your admins. asking a user what color the screen is, or being able to put a different piece of information on that wallpaper based on its login state helps troubleshooting, and it helps really clearly identify to the user that something has happened. Wallpaper has changed. Look at that. The device is different now. Really small, but really useful thing to put on your devices when you're setting them up. Okay, so what do those configuration profiles actually look like? Here's a couple of examples here. I like to start with this no role section, or my null state, where I only have a few apps that are allowed. You can find that in your restrictions area. And the example video that we showed at the beginning had Microsoft Authenticator. Again, very important. Have to have that visible at all times, even if it's in that restricted state, and even if it's on the second page. You can't hide it. You can't restrict it because it has to have access. And I had the demo kit available and Jamf setup. That's pretty much it. So that's my null state. Once I want to have a role selected, though, now I can release more apps and have the home screen layout appear a little bit different. Now, this is very important, though. There can only be one home screen layout on a device. I make one global restriction that is for all of my devices that are home screen layout. It makes for a little bit of a complex look because it has to be one layout for all of your role selections. But the way the race conditions work and the way that just the way it all works out, having more than one home screen layout assigned to a device and making that switch between users can put the device in an unstable state or an unpredictable state. So just don't do that. Have one home screen layout for all of your devices, and then only reveal the apps that are needed based on that role itself. And this is once you've made that selection, you're now revealing those apps. Now I've got the Maps app because I'm in transport. Nice and easy, very simple restriction that you can make. But don't take my word for it. Let's bring Sean back.
Excellent. And we're excited and honored to have one of our first single login partners, PlayerLink, join us here to have a discussion about how they're using the single login system to enhance their mobile content management platform and dig into how these pieces can help your endpoint management strategy at your organization. And for that, we'd like to welcome Greg Menard, co-founder and chief technology officer of PlayerLink. Welcome, Greg.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Now, PlayerLink is a new partner to Jamf Nation, and there's probably a number of people who have never heard of PlayerLink before. So let's start there. Can you share a little bit about PlayerLink and what it is?
Yeah, so I'll start a little bit about the kind of the beginning. Our origins are actually building telecom companies, and for about a little over 10 years, we had built telecom, the software to manage it, actual IP networks, video conferencing hosted IP. We ultimately ended up selling that, and that became Vonage Business. And when we sold it, we were looking for more opportunistic opportunities. We really liked the aspect of the software component which we had built, which ended up being probably the biggest asset we had. I was actually at a barbecue, and there was the vice president of operations for the Denver Broncos NFL football team. And I was like, hey, you've got probably 120 to 150 of the most expensive employees on the planet. What do you guys do for technology? How do you keep everyone in sync? And I was surprised to learn that they didn't have a lot. Now, this is back in 2011, but I went back, built a high fidelity wireframe that kind of built an application that was all around kind of the day in the life of players and coaches, everything from assessing the video, their opponents, their playbooks, integrating those into video, from their diet, nutrition, schedules, you name it, and brought that back into Coach Fox and John Elway and pitched the idea, and they loved it. We went forward, got about 60% of the NFL, a bunch of other professional sports teams, college, you name it. But one of the challenges they had was, hey, we're always in hotels, on planes, we're at stadiums, Wi-Fi spotty. We needed to make sure that worked. So we had to build all of this stuff with guaranteed delivery, guaranteed access anywhere. So we created this synchronization process that could push all the content to the mobile edge so that they could instantly have access to that. This created a lot of publicity back in 2012 around digital playbooks, which we had a bunch of large companies reach out to us, kind of the likes of Chipotle, Bridgestone, Stars Encore, Southern Company and Gas. they're like, hey, we have mobile workforces out in the field, and we need access, and they don't always have great coverage. So it was a natural parlay from sports into kind of these new industries. They also brought in the need for shared devices, with a lot of people sharing multiple devices. So we solved all of those problems, and that brought us into kind of the company that you have today.
Having spoken to many people who have flaky internet connections, myself included, I can understand completely about needing that information right there on demand. So one of the big questions that people have come up and asked me about when I've had conversations like that too is, how is something like a purpose-built system like this different than using some sort of enterprise thing they might already have, like SharePoint or Box? Like how is this different than what might be out there in their current stack?
Yeah, we really look at this as kind of mobile content management versus traditional enterprise content management. And the first thing you look at is, who is the audience, who's using this? Like a SharePoint, you've got really strong corporate users that, they're a desk force where they're used to building out complex structures. Each department has their own organization of their content. There's a lot of collaboration in building these things, from procedures, various content, videos. And so they're really on the creation side of building these corporate assets. With mobile content management, we're really changing gears to the audience being that deskless workforce, or people in the field or the front line. And so what they need is very different. We're really about the workflow, and MCM kind of stands on some core tenets around security, corporate control, connectivity, and workflow. And so one of the pieces that's big is to be able to create an experience that is part of their daily workflow. When you're on the front line, you have minutes and moments, and you're always switching context of what you're doing. Everything from helping a customer to maybe you're actually looking at a piece of equipment to you've got an incident report you got to fill out. And so you want a tool and assets that are really, really quick at your fingertips, that you can gain information into how to do that in part of your job. There's a couple of stats, like, for example, 117% increase in content utilization when it's accessed in 2 taps or less for deskless workforce. Deskless workforce spends over 3 hours a week trying to find information. And when you think about, they only have these minutes and moments to do things, we are very, very purpose built in being able to create that digital workflow along their physical workflow to make sure that they're able to do their job in a very, very quick manner. One other thing too is, as the digital world is expanding, you look at all these business apps, you're getting a disjointed workflow. And so we're trying to consolidate a lot of that experience inside of our app that leverages IT assets. Maybe you've built your own apps that are custom to your business, and maybe they'd be able to log into payroll and other various apps. We can consolidate all that into a kind of a single experience. What we have found the biggest takeaway is speed drives resource adoption. So if you give people the ability to access information quickly, they will use it. We did a study with Starbucks. They have well over 4 million minutes of views every single month in their system. But we found is the 80% of their sessions only lasted 15 seconds. That's an incredible number, because what that means is that barista is going to pull up, look at a recipe, make that drink order correct, instead of just guessing or asking somebody else. And that is really what enhances kind of your brand and your quality and your standards.
And having drank a lot of Starbucks coffee in the past, I can tell you those folks are working. They are cranking through it like nobody's business there. I can see it, but when we first talked about PlayerLink enabling single login, you immediately said yes. And I think we all kind of know the why here, but can you share a little bit more details?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, speed and security often are kind of inverse relationships. So you're looking at, you want to be able to access fast, but you want to be very secure. And so even though like single sign-on's out there for a lot of apps, what we love about single login is it really opens up an entire ecosystem of business applications that are needed. And so the value is log in once, then you have access to all these various applications. One other thing that we'll do is you can use universal linking. So if you built, let's say, an IT asset of an application or another system, you can leverage all the content in PlayerLink through a universal link. And that experience means no extra logins. You're instantly one app popping over the content, reviewing it, and you're right back into your app. And so that speed to be able to access all the assets in a very, very succinct way is great. The other part of it that was one of the most important parts is the destruction of that token. And having single login is phenomenal because not only are you logging in with one access, but the most important part of the security of all this is that it's destroying all the tokens. So as a PlayerLink application that participates with single login in Jamf's world, we automatically get notified to destroy our token. And there's no chance in a multi-user environment of somebody logging in and somebody had left a login and a session was still going on another app. That could be critical.
Yeah, that's vital too. And Starbucks is a perfect example. There might be information that a manager gets to see, but the legal team says that normal baristas might not need to get that information. So that's great. Now, PlayerLink is doing another JNUC session that will dig more into the mobile content management piece of devices. But before you check that piece out, I'm always the type of person who likes to be able to play with the new toys, and I'm sure there's an IT manager out there listening who wants to play with it right away. What is the best way to do that so they can get their hands on it?
Yeah, so we've set up essentially kind of a freemium starter pack that includes 2 gigs free, unlimited devices, unlimited users, unlimited time. If you hit that barcode, that'll send you up to a sign-up sheet. And we'll have a PlayerLink customer success manager reach out to you, get you all set up, and really kind of fast track any kind of scenario effort or proof of concept that you'd like to engage with.
Absolutely great. Greg, thank you so much for joining in and talking about how you guys adopted single sign-on so quickly. I'm going to toss it back to Tim, and he's going to take us through a couple other things that he's seen in life and some organizations using PlayerLink and other pieces and single sign-on.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, there's really many different use cases for single login and for PlayerLink too. And the two together are really quite powerful to be able to log in and have all of your data and be able to log out and have all that data securely not available on that device anymore. Super, super, super important and really, really, really useful. I've worked with all of these different industries and I've worked with all of these different kinds of workflows in the past. Adding single sign-on and adding single login to them are only going to make them better. More recently, we've discovered a new way to do sort of an on-duty, off-duty workflow where you can have a device that may be more of a BYOD type device, or maybe work for an airline and you're traveling overseas and you want to be able to use Netflix, but you don't want to use it on the flight. When you're logged in, you can hide all of the personal apps. And when you're logged out, when you've hit reset, you can reveal those personal apps and let them use that while they're off duty. So many different ways. I personally am very excited to see how our customers use it. We think we know how you're going to use it, and we are always only about 20% right. We will do 80% surprise of how we use our own software and how you use our software. So I'm excited to see it. Please don't hesitate to contact us and let us help you figure it out. And to help you figure it out, we've got some documents. These are the configuration guides. We have some developer documentations out there as well. If you are a developer and want to add it to your own app, please contact us. We have an entire partner team that would love to work with you on how to add it to your own app. We can help with that, and our documentation can help with it as well. If you'd like a more demo, we have a whole sales team as well who would love to work with you to show you how to use it. You'll probably end up with either me or Sean as well to talk to you about it again. So hopefully that's okay. And we can talk to you how you're going to be using it individually for your own specific use case. Thank you everyone for coming today. I look forward to talking to everybody, and please have a great JNUC.